Okay, are we ready to?
Sure.
Okay, let's do that. I think we got a quorum about everybody that's going to come to this meeting, and it's a joint work session between the hospital board and the assembly. We have, I believe, more than half of the hospital board and more than half of the assembly, so we're good to go. Purpose of this meeting is a couple-fold. One was to take a look at where we are right now with looking at the possibility of new hospital and new hospital sites. And then there has, I'm really encouraged about the work that's been done by the hospital board and looking at our community and what's needed here. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Phil and let him proceed with that.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Bob. All right, so this is my 4th work session with everyone, so this is exciting. Is there anything that anyone wants to add to the agenda that I had sent out? I was trying to keep it as high level as possible, and the point of the work session was to really focus in on some specific topics such as the new facility, look at some of the recommendations and review some of the recommendations from last year, some of the things that occurred this year towards that priority with the new facility, and look at maybe setting some goals and priorities and action items for this coming year. And I was planning on just providing an overview. Obviously, this is the assembly and the board work session, so if there's any point where we want to have discussion, obviously it's we can stop and don't have to let me do all the talking. So I'm happy to kind of go and review some of those things. I have a couple of things in the room where Karen is. Karen is a new assistant. She's sitting over there, and I brought with me the community needs assessment, and I also provided a copy of the master plan that was done in 2020. These are all, it's a pretty lengthy document. They're all online and available on our website. So we consolidated it to a link called the community needs assessment, and both the master planning and the community needs assessment from last year are on there. All right, so here's the agenda and just discussion about the new building, and then we have some bullets beneath it and a review and action items from last year. We met on May 5th, 2021. We had a resolution, 2 resolutions, from one from the assembly and one from the board, fairly identical. Review some of the funding that occurred in the last year, and then maybe some discussion about next steps and some of the action items that we need to take to move some of the funding that was received further along. And then I would just have a short discussion on some highlights on the community needs assessment that was completed, and then some topics, depending on what you want to hear about continuity of care, some of the operational aspects. If we want to talk about further things on bullet B, we can do that. Does that sound good with everyone?
Yep, that sounds very good, Phil.
Right.
And this is a chance to ask questions and to delve into any pieces of this that you have questions on.
Right. Yeah. So here's just a copy of the resolution. It's a duplicate of the one that was approved from the assembly after the last work session. So last year, if you recall, we focused a lot. I spent a lot of time talking about the operations of the hospital, and I went back on time and I looked at volumes across different types of services that we have. I covered a lot of the services that we provide at Petersburg Medical Center, and also talked about our finances. Spent a lot of time on projects that we were focused on, and then we spent some time on talking about the new facility. And at that time, there was really the goal was that we can come together and recognize that we needed a new facility. And that was really the point of the meeting, is that we know we had a long road to go with how do we fund it. But really the goal last year was to work together and come to a common a common theme a common goal where we wanted to at least identify that we needed a new facility. And we were able to put a resolution together and approved that we needed a new facility. We recognized that and formed these resolution and these bullets up here. I don't think I have to read them all, but is there any comments on that at all, or anything you want to add on that, Bob or Jared? No. All right. So one of the things out of that resolution, there was a lot of conversation. It actually stimulated a lot of conversation, as you know, in the community, where how are we going to fund it? Where's the money going to come from? Where's the location? And so it sort of sparked a lot of conversation and rejuvenated the talk within the community about the new hospital. And that had, obviously some pros and some cons around it. Obviously, the big thing is funding. Where are we going to find funding? And the goal was to, number one, identify that we needed a new facility and a new building, I should say, not a new facility. I think we want to focus on that it's just a structure that we need. The aging of the plant and looking at the master plan that was done in 2020 and the structural engineering and the assessment of the facility at that time, and that is basically at the end of life. And in that master plan, which covers about 400 pages, looked at debt capacity and looked at many of the different elements of structural engineering and the facility itself, and gathering a lot of the information from the past, and recognizing and estimating different aspects. One was renovation in the existing site, and the others were identifying locations that were provided by the borough and looking at what it would take to build, and providing some estimations on what it would cost to build. And to renovate in place was actually the most expensive option, which was surprising because it'd been nice to have been able to do some of that work in place, but it's very cost prohibitive. It's very difficult to do that. It's also very, very costly to do that in place. And so identifying greenfield sites was the next step. And the work that was done with the master plan and over the last year was really looking at three locations, but two that seemed like the most realistic. And I have it up here on the presentation where we are looking at the Excel Street and the North Hogan blocks and kind of focusing in on that area as potential sites. And so last year we were able to obtain some permits to look at environmental and geotech work on those sites. And that's really the importance of that is to see if we can actually build there. And that's something that's just the due diligence of the work of those locations. And from the master plan in 2020, we had an RFP that was completed to do the master plan, and off of that, we were able to also put into environmental work and obtain those permits. So this was actually part of that track back in 2020, and to try to focus on building out environmental work for the different locations that were identified. Since in the last year, we've had a number of conversations. We've had, looking at trying to really hone in on some of these locations and these sites. And that's really the work I think we need to kind of talk about today is of the locations that the borough had provided, what makes the most sense for a new facility? What are some of the limitations? What are some of the things that we want to look at for the locations and really have a good conversation? I've met with Bob. I've talked with Liz. We met with Steve. Talked with our board about some of these locations at various meetings. And I don't know, Bob, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about some of those conversations, or do we want to?
I can do that. We looked at other sites too, besides these. Within the airport boundaries, as most of you know, our facility, fire and rescue facility, the boundary is just just towards the airport of that. And we looked at sites there and so forth. And Liz, and unfortunately Liz is not here, but she looked at those in some detail to see whether or not some of that would be feasible. And the state wanted to come back. They wanted a lease on, let's say, on a campus that would produce there. They wanted a $65,000 a year lease in order to be able to put a facility there. But then we looked at a couple other things. Liz, and I believe Carl was involved with that, but we looked at whether or not where sewer and water was available, where electricity was and so forth. And there was nothing that went out that way that really did the job. And so they kind of walked away from those sites out there. Plus, we went back, the state, we were going to have to go negotiate with the state in some way for that, a lease on one of those pieces of property within the airport boundary out there. But the big one was the sewer, water, and electrical. There just doesn't go beyond where our facility is there right now. That's a big cost to go there. Anything else you want me to add to that?
No, and so there's a couple of things that I learned mostly from Liz on the process with selecting a site. And number one is, we have to keep the things moving as far as, location. Location is obviously, can be a very contentious topic. But when we look at some of the options and the pros and cons of the different areas that we're assessing, the first thing is obviously, can we build in these locations? And that's the purpose of the last motion that the assembly approved. And thank you for doing that. That really kind of takes the allowance of getting those permits and getting the firm down here to be able to just dig and just do those test sites for the locations to make sure that there's nothing that of consequence there that prohibits any build there. And then
I might also add that those motions that we passed last time really helps Phil and the hospital board to be able to go for more funding too, because they have support, and that's very one in the grants that are being written. That has tremendous value.
Right, and that funding, one of the things that was halting us, we had the permits last year, but funding is certainly limiting. So we were able to put it on the CAPSIS system as a separate item, but also when we now have the Senator Murkowski's direct spend and appropriations for $8 million, we can use that funding towards that work, and that's real exciting because we can start moving the process forward. And with the site, there's a process, and I would probably ask the assembly to make sure that I'm speaking correctly on this. But my understanding is, if we have the dig done and we look at a couple of sites and look at maybe the North Hogan and Excel Street site is pretty much almost one full block. When you look at the land, it almost touches upon each other. And I have a slide that shows what, if you put a hospital in a location, what sort of taking up, what sort of site prep you need for that location, and at least from a square footage standpoint. And so the idea is that, what those sites would encompass from a plat, and then selecting the area and then looking at the infrastructure of sewer, water, and power, and then zoning would come in, and that all is a public process. So my understanding is that, if let's say we talk about the Excel Street location or somewhere thereof, and that's a decent location, that sounds like a great spot, then the process is that it would go to planning and zoning. And then that is actually a public process where you have public comment. And so I think that there's some concern in the community where, making decisions without public input is a concern. And this actually follows really good process, so that if we do the site, if it looks like it's a good location, it also, by just from the planning and zoning, you have the natural process of public input and public comment. So I thought that kind of covers or ticks the boxes of some of these things, and also is able to move some of the momentum forward on the site location. So I think that to me, that's like, if there's one goal out of this meeting is looking at the sites and deciding on what makes the most sense for the community and what makes the most sense for the hospital to be able to choose a location, and then following that public process and moving it forward.
So Phil, on the Excel Street example that you have up there, does that encroach on the airport subdivision, the proposed airport subdivision?
If I can address that a little bit. It depends on where that's laid out. It could or it could not. One end of it could. But it just depends on how it's laid out, and we don't know enough yet. When they do all the testing on that, that's kind of the place we got to take a look at that. But I think it can be avoided.
Sure, but the way this is laid out
Right,
here, it is encroaching on the airport.
right, it is.
subdivision.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree.
And
But
so,
let me just say that it was a gross line around that is a gross line around it. So, but it can be laid out without encroaching upon that. Go ahead.
and the North Haugen site, does that on the, I guess it's the Kupernoff facing side, are there houses, based on this, are there houses on the Kupernoff side of this North Haugen lot? The reason I'm asking is because if you decide to put based on your geotechnical work, if you decide to put the hospital in the North Haugen site, I imagine you're going to hear something from the neighbors in that neck of the woods. And I'm just curious, are there, without looking at my property viewer, it looks like there's houses there, but currently are there houses on the backside of that North Haugen site?
I can't remember. I've looked at that in detail. I can't remember whether there's houses on there or not.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
There you go. There's a detail.
there's a Google snippet, and actually that square footprint it's not the location we would want, but that's to give you an idea of what a 70,000 square foot building would look like for a footprint that's sort of required, for the land around it. And if you take that rectangle, I suppose, or square, and apply it it's about between the North Haugen and the Excel, it's about 17 acres. And when you're looking at that, and about 6.5 acre block is what you need for a hospital.
And Phil, just to clarify, you're talking about a one-story building as opposed to a multi-story building?
This is a 2-story.
Okay.
Yep. So it's one of the things that we would have to do to save on the footprint. The cost is a 2-story, right?
I have a question about the Excel property. My question's regarding access. Just would we be using the pre-existing roads, or would we be doing a new, because I look at that little corner of our community is a little meandering in my memory. And so I'm wondering if there was a different plan, or would we be hoping for the best with that?
There's 2 things I think that when I met with Chief Kerr on transport safety, and I met with Liz, is to really look at maybe some growth opportunity where we're looking at maybe looking at Excel Street, expanding that into a loop. And my understanding, Carl's here, it looks like so. And I don't mean to speak on the utilities, but my understanding is you kind of want a loop. You don't want an endpoint on utilities. So taking the Excel Street maybe and expanding that area. And I think that's you can see the plat here on that. And then looping the utilities around. I think that's kind of sort of the idea. Carl, I'm looking to you for acknowledgement on that. Does that sound like a right? So things like that we'd want to include in the planning and design of the facility. So it's not just the building goes up and that's that. There's a lot of these other components that we want to make sure we have some comment on and some understanding of what we can do to make sure that it's a safe traffic pattern, because there's a lot of flow that comes in to that area from the Hogan side, and also from, so having an access point on the back and developing that as well. So there's safety involved in that, because there's the ball fields there as well. And so we want to make sure that we have, good planning on that.
Quick question. So have we engaged any firm to come down and do the geotechnical work yet?
Yes, yeah, so part of the, from the 2020 RFP that was completed, the firm, we were, was allotted the environmental study. And so the environmental study was permitted last year. So we put in for permits 2 years ago, no, last year, to make the allowances to do that. And we do have a firm out of Juneau that's ready to go for that work, for the digs.
And when will they do that?
As soon as, well, we got the green light last week, and so the green light is whenever they can get here.
And then so will the process be when we get the results from the geotechnical work, then you'll come back and then we'll take a closer look at the sites?
Correct.
And any rough timeline on that?
Hopefully by the end of the summer, if not sooner. Yep, it seems like they had carved out some time and were able to get it done, but I really don't have a good time frame right now for you.
So then the process will be the hospital board will make a site selection. They'll send that to the assembly. We'll okay it, then it'll go to planning and zoning, and that's when the process will start in that fashion.
Correct. And the funding and really the appropriations, the $8 million from Senator Murkowski, that money would be used in this whole process.
Phil, I want to go back and address something that Jeff talked about, is that Liz has been thinking about and trying to find a way that, whichever way we do this, that the infrastructure, the water and sewer, electrical, we might be able to do it for those lots to be developed, Jeff, but there's nothing, there are a lot of questions, no answers yet. But she has the same thought in mind that you were thinking, I believe.
Sure, because we just spent $7,000 at the last meeting to authorize engineering work to expand the airport subdivision as well as the XL Street subdivision. And both of the two parcels that we're talking about are associated with the two sites, the North Haugen and the XL Street that the hospital's thinking about. So to me, instead of, we're going to spend the $7,000 to get some engineering work done, and the hospital's doing some geotechnical work to figure out where their site that they'd like to pick. It seems like the borough could be wasting $7,000 if we're doing engineering work and all of a sudden the hospital decides they want to put a spot up at North Haugen and or XL Street, and it kind of shoots the borough in the foot when we're trying to increase housing in Petersburg. So it's a real concern of mine that we're headed in one direction and the hospital's headed in another direction, but yeah, that's just something I've been thinking about last couple of weeks.
Well, Liz has been thinking about that also. She's been looking at, not sure how all this is going to come out, but it's definitely in the hopper, that thought.
I mean, if we can give this information to the engineering firm and send them to the other end of the subdivision. This is a yes and situation. More utilities, the better. More studies, the better. So I'm excited so just for clarification, we are focusing on the North Haugen and Excel Street. We've ruled out North 8th and South Haugen for different reasons. Is that why they're circled that way? Or
I think the thing that makes sense in many ways is if we look at some of the location. Number one, when you look at the community cafes, and I get feedback from the community, I think the comment about housing that Jeff is mentioning is an accurate one. So it really limits where you can build, right? So at the same time, having a facility adjacent to senior living and assisted living, and then hospital and long-term care, that actually makes a lot of sense from a continuity care standpoint. Steve had mentioned a similar concept, a few last assembly meeting as well. And I think there's also an opportunity to have those two paths converge where we're building infrastructure, a hospital's infrastructure using utilities, and also if housing is part of that development, it might be an opportunity as well. If we can work together on some of that stuff, so it's not a wasted money, that would be a possibility as well. And so that way, if we can develop things and with common ground and that we're all working, towards the same goal, I think that would be that's a potentially an opportunity is on that. So. Any other thoughts on those? I mean, I think there's some homework to be done from us and come back to the assembly on potentially some locations. The only other thing I would bring up on the North 8th lot, kind of excluded it from the geotech work. I just don't know if there's a thought on that because it didn't come up on our final, but I'm willing to entertain it. Only reason I didn't bring it up is because it's costly. It adds about a 40K amount to the amount for the geotech work. So I just didn't think if it was really wasn't a contender in the grand scheme. It's pretty much out there in left field, well, right field, I guess, and putting a bad pun on it. But is there any heartburn on that at all? Okay.
I'd just make one comment. I like the idea since it looks like we're investigating you guys taking over Mountain View Manor, that the campuses be close together. It seems like that makes a lot of sense.
Well, even if we're not, it still makes sense.
Yes, I agree.
And I think it really, I think Steve actually mentioned when I first landed here was one of the things he mentioned, and as far as a continuity of care, not taking over obviously, but or management or anything, but just from continuity care standpoint, it does make a lot of sense. And having the ability for residents and to seek health care very closely and to have some activities related to that. We certainly, with a population, a growing population, elderly population, it's certainly, and when we look at our master planning, we look at our community needs assessment, demographics, that's aging population, it certainly makes a lot of sense to be able to do something like that. So, and when I talk to community members, I don't get any pushback at all when I talk, I do when we get close to people's houses, but not on something like that. So I see, seems like we're getting good feedback on that. It also does make a lot of sense from a practical standpoint, and we just got to make sure that we can build there. This is an example. So Senator Murkowski has been very supportive of community in general and in community hospitals, and I'm very grateful for her in supporting Petersburg Medical Center and Petersburg in providing some direct spend and appropriations for this next phase. And it's just this is an example of the HRSA, which is the Health Resources and Services Administration, and that's the application process that we have to submit. And our grant writer spent many days filling out, I think it was about 40-page document. And I added to the attachment which is the EID, which is the basically what's the acronym? Unfortunately, they're built on acronyms, but it looks at the phases and the questions asked on the site selection, and it goes into a lot of detail and asks a lot of questions about floodplain and environmental work and things like that. So it's very thorough was the point of putting this on there. Included in that packet, this is an estimation. And I think it's important that that this isn't the final. So with this appropriations, not only is we're going to look at site selection, environmental study, geotech work, but we have to be able to take it to the next step. One of the big concerns with that master plan was, oh, you know, these estimations of such an enormous budget. And obviously we all know that inflation's gonna, you know, kick us with the cost and supplies as well. But I think one of the things that we want to do is we want to refine it. We want to look at things like, is it a 2-story building versus a 1-story building? Is it really 85,000 square feet, or can we condense it to 70,000 square feet? Can we look at the existing footprint, and can we actually look at innovation to expand areas, you know, that don't necessarily add to the cost of the building, but we can utilize outdoor space, things like that, where we're taking an architectural firm and really doing a deep dive into the architectural design, the space programming, and coming out with a product that we can live with and that we can actually move forward with and have better cost estimations as a result of that. So that's a lot of work, and this 8 million appropriations will help get us to that point. So the estimations on our master plan were good, but they were just estimations. And even this budget here is an estimation. And until we actually get an architectural firm with engineering and really looking into the deep dive of that to get full designs, we're not gonna be able to answer that question in a great level of detail the way we want it until we go through that. So again, this budget is a caution, it is an estimation.
So, so this $84 million estimation, is this based on a 2-story building with X amount of feet, or will your architectural design work come up with a building to suit what you're looking for in a building?
There's a couple of things that we made assumptions on to reduce the costs to get here. One of them was to do a two-level building like we have now. So yes, that is correct. And that is really to reduce the footprint. The footprint of the site is an exponential cost. And so we made that assumption to make it a 2-story to reduce that, to reduce the cost. And the second thing was really firming down the size, the square footage and the footprint, because in that square footage footprint is not just the construction costs, but it's also the FF&E, which is the furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And that's a huge variation. You know, like, you know, a lot of people are like, well, we could just bring over the equipment from the old hospital to the new, but the reality is with all the new infrastructure, you know, there's a lot of you know, regulations that we have to make sure we follow, and we may not necessarily be able to bring all that equipment that's in the existing building. And so there's a huge estimation on that side to make sure that we have some leeway with that, so that we can have the CT scans and the X-rays and, you know, all the things that go along with a new facility. Some of that stuff we can bring over, but that level of detail on the FF&E, that estimation is turnkey. So the nice thing about that is we can back, you know, that can subtract on cost the more we are able to bring some of those pieces of equipment over.
When do you, once you start the architectural design or you hire an architectural firm, when would we be able to see like a cost estimate on a 2-story building? And the reason I'm asking this is because this is the big thing that I hear all the time, is how are we going to pay for a facility? And I think I know we need a new facility, but it's just a matter of how we're going to pay for it. And we've talked about this at length, and that's the big thing I hear all the time. And I you know, we're not going to be able to really have a detailed discussion about what it's going to cost until we get that number more or less locked in, so we can proceed.
Yeah, and actually that blueprint or that design also has a lifespan. So, you know, when you have a design in a full estimate, you know, I think you know, you can't just shelve it for 5 years and bring it out again. You know, you have a lifespan on it, and generally industry standard is like 3 years or so. So yeah, that is the hope, is that we would come back to a further you know, honing that down to a total. So with this federal support, we were also able to get the state interested in providing some support as well. And they did put in to the state budget for 20 million. And that money is tied in with a Department of Treasury, sort of Section 604 funding is what they call it apparently. And that is where the state and the hospital can work together on applying for that funding. And that'll get us pretty far along the path if we're able to get and secure that funding as well. And there are some other funding opportunities as we build or sort of stack the capital as we go forward to be able to come up with a full funding plan. One of the things I do intend on doing, Jeff, I know that was one of the questions that you had, was putting a funding plan together. And I'd like to include that in this year and putting a funding plan together. And I think we'll be able to do that with these two funding sources as we go forward.
Thank you.
Yep. So I did cover these funding and appropriations and the capital funding process. And I am going to RFP. So with the master plan that was done, we did a very thorough RFP process, interviewed applicants and architectural firms, and that firm is, the time has gone by. It's basically another 2-3 years. It feels like 10 years with COVID. So there's a lot of things that have happened, and what I think we feel like for due diligence, we are going to put another RFP together to make sure that we have a good partnership in selecting the right firm. So an opportunity, it could be the same firm or it could be an opportunity for another firm to come in. So we want to certainly follow the RFP process for all the next steps as well. So. That's all I had for the site and the facility. I wanted to keep it pretty focused.
Are there any questions for Phil on where we are, where we're headed?
I have a question, but it's more about I guess we'll call it the old facility. I have people asking about what because it's the land itself, if I believe, is borough owned, but because of the building being yours, it's a joint decision. And so I was wondering if the board or if you at the hospital have talked about what the plan is to do at that site, or is that something we're just trying not to think about?
In the master plan, and I do think it's very, very important to have a plan for the old building. My experience is with the Nome project is that was a disservice not to have a plan and funding allocated in that plan. And whether that's not just vacating and demolition. And, I think the one in where I was, that was very costly. And then, what happens is that those buildings can end up becoming a safety hazard. Those things can become areas that affect the housing around it. And so having a plan, I think what I was asked to do on the master plan was to look at just demolition. Believe it or not, I remember talking with the structural engineer when they assessed the building, and he said that there's 3 dates in that building. There's a really old version of I think in the 60s and, in that long-term care side. And then there's some renovation done in the 80s. There might even be some older dates in there underneath. But the structural engineer said that he recommended demolition. He said that most of the building is really not, even for some other thing, it's not really a good idea to renovate. The structure that is just a stucco, it's that 80s style where they had a frame and then they put some exterior on, and it really doesn't have a lot of meat to it. He said the 60s version is pretty solid, which I thought was very interesting because I think that was the building that the Petersburg residents actually built back in the 1964 or something like that. So I thought that was interesting, but generally speaking, I think demolition was we asked the architectural firm to factor into that cost. So if you look in the estimation of that master plan, there is demolition attached to that cost to make it into a park or, whatever, turn it back over to the borough into some other space that's nice, park space.
I think in one of our earlier meetings, that was one of the discussions, and the discussion was is demolition.
Right.
And so, but it's also a good point, though, that we probably need to look at that down the road as a decision point.
Because I think it's also, people are preemptively sad about losing the hospital in that location as far as being a community access point or focal point. And so I had a conversation with somebody about how nice it would be if that area became an opportunity for more housing, but then also a spot for, because that is also the building where the public health office is. And so if there could still be kind of a community health outpost. So I guess that's the whatever, there's a lot within the whatever that you said.
Well,
regarding
I
that,
have
so-
to say that
yeah.
funding from the state, public health will come with us
Okay,
up onto that new building. So
Cool.
that is certainly part of that funding.
very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess, how do we figure out how we're going to talk about that whatever that comes next? Is that for assembly to decide? Because once it's demoed, it's no longer part of PMC's register or on your,
Yeah, one of the things from the assembly previously was that there was some funding set aside to do with whatever the assembly wishes to do with that space. And I think that at that point, the idea was to make it into a park or sort of that's demolition.
thank you.
I think that's an important point, though. I definitely don't want to replicate that. I think it's a disservice to the community not to include that in the cost. All right, if there's no other questions, I'd like to just maybe move on to the community needs assessment. And this is something that we're required to do every 3 years. We did one, and right before I came, there was one that was done. And in 2018, and we just did another one here in 2021. And I just want to go over it. It's online. It's available to public. I also have a copy here. I intend on actually, I mentioned to the board, it was sort of a final draft. And the reason I said that is because inevitably you find grammatical mistakes and some errors and things like that. So I'd like to compile all those and get a final version out there. But generally speaking, the results are there, and the content is there, and it's a nice format, and I think online actually it's a nice layout. So just a couple of things. I want to thank Julie Walker for really putting this on. She did a lot of the work behind this community needs assessment. She has a background in this and a master's degree, and what a find to have her working for us, but also taking this on. Is a lot of work. And so there was a survey and interviews conducted in June to August of 2021. We had draft results completed in April of 2022. And the methodology was we had perceptions of community health survey. We had 189 responses. This was available online or on paper to the general public, and we advertised this quite throughout that time frame quite a bit. Questions consisted of basic demographics, healthcare utilization, Petersburg top strengths, needs for improvement, things that impact the health of their families and their community. And then there was there was like key informant interviews. And these are probably, I think, the most valuable and quite lengthy. There were 36 focused interviews, and there was key informant means the way that it was done was something called a snowball sampling technique. And it's basically, you go to key stakeholders in the community, and from them, you ask who to ask on identifying other potential participants to interview. And it's an established technique for this kind of process. Those were qualitative. They were very in-depth. They were at least an hour long. And I thought it would be great to just sample the whole community, people who were against the hospital and people who were for the hospital, people who were against this and for that, so it was really kind of an idea of making it a really good cross-section in the community. So there was a SWOT analysis done, and that's your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Participants were asked to assist in identifying during the individual interview, participants were asked to walk through a SWOT analysis And during the process, they were asked to identify strengths and weaknesses internal to our community that support or hinder the health of the community. They were also asked what opportunities or threats external to our community could positively or negatively impact the health of our community. And there is a slide. I don't think I added it to this. Nope, unfortunately, but it is in there, and my eyes are not the greatest. Unfortunately, we had some findings. So the strengths, the top 3 strengths. Can you read that? Oh my, this is terrible.
Hang on. let me
All right.
look right here.
Maybe I can do a link.
Oh, my.
Yeah. Test. Oh, you have?
There
them?
you
Yeah, I
go.
can see
Thank
it on
you.
my phone.
Thank you, Kelly.
Looks like we're-
Grab a microphone, Kelly, because it
Yes.
has to be
Maybe
recorded.
up here, if you don't mind coming to the dais.
You're right here.
All right.
So from the strengths, it looks like nonprofits and volunteers, the school system, and local health, rural healthcare. The weaknesses were, I'm having a hard time in this light now. Limited health care services, housing, substance abuse and behavioral health. Opportunities were technologies, opportunities for grants and new hospital. And threats were outside corporations taking over healthcare, insurance and cost of healthcare, and isolation and cost of living.
Perfect. Thank you. Now that you read it, I could read it. pretty well. So, and those are in the packet, and it's a lot more visible than what I printed out for myself here. The other thing of note, there were 2 findings. That was one finding that was of importance. The second one was a graph, and it was the support for the hospital, and there was a pie chart that showed 69% of the recipients showed support for local healthcare, and I thought that was definitely worthwhile and really a nice cross section within the community for local support and local healthcare. Let's see if there's anything else. Am I missing anything, Kelly, from that community's assessment? Okay, there in the packet, it also lists the people that were interviewed. It's part of the process as well. We didn't put it in the publication, but it is online. So, any questions about that? I showed these last year, and these are, I just thought it'd be nice to just build off of it. So we're, not constantly refreshing graphs and such like that. But, one of the things that we've struggled with in the past couple of years is obviously COVID. And with COVID, we're both seeing a reduction in number of services, reduction in use and utility, reduction in our census. We struggled quite a bit in that. And at the same time, we were focused so heavily on addressing COVID, and a lot of our energies were incredibly challenged, and we struggled with much of the same as other healthcare institutions related to burnout, related to addressing the COVID response, also addressing hiring and staffing, and those are still ongoing. Feel very fortunate to have some great staff recently joining our group with some of those vacancies, but it's certainly a challenge. And I feel like that the hospital in general, we have ups and downs, we have peaks and valleys. We had some great months. We had revenue coming in, we were recovering, and then we got hit with an outbreak, and we lost all the traction we had. And so I think it's gonna be about another year or so before this next fiscal year. I think we're seeing definitely signs of recovery. All of a sudden, we'll just be completely inundated at the clinic. Clinic is, Kelly can attest to that, so busy. We have 4 physicians and they're just constantly waiting list. And there's a lot of demand and a lot of access that we're trying to work through. And we're excited. We're intending on building our access to our physician group with some mid-levels PAs and nurse practitioners coming on. that we're very excited about to be able to offset some of that. So there's some building we've got to do this next fiscal year, but certainly we were hit hard with COVID. We're very grateful some of the funding that the federal government was able to provide to offset some of the costs. It allowed us to be able to provide testing for free into this community, allowed us to be responsive right away when we had COVID in vulnerable patients. We were able to get treatment, monoclonal antibody treatment right away. Our nursing staff and physicians worked tireless hours to be able to address that. So huge compliment to our staff, but certainly we've been hit just like many other folks. Out of long-term care census is probably the lowest it's been. And we're just starting to recover that. At the same time, we had some interesting areas of growth. And I've mentioned this a number of times, our home health, we went from, if you look at 2006 to 2017, we're pretty steady with our number of visits. And all of a sudden, there's just an incredible explosion. And it talks about the need of the care in the community, because home health has been able to be very dynamic and able to go into the homes, addressing the need. And as they go into the homes and as they go into the need, they assess more need. And that's a very common thing. When you expand a service line, there's a thing that occurs where all of a sudden it's like a can of worms. You open it up and you crack the lid, and then there's this tremendous demand for that. And that's how you know you have a sort of a great opportunity to be able to grow. And those programs that have that occur, you want to be able to allow it to grow. And we are fortunate to have that growth. And we don't see any ebbing of that. It just continues to grow. You know, with COVID has been allowed that opportunity to open that lid. And what we see is this tremendous need out there in the community. And we did hear that at the community needs assessment, or no, the community cafe, sorry, that was done in 2019 in November. We heard a lot of folks from the community where we took information where they wanted social work done, where they wanted a social worker to be able to navigate through the system. They wanted more care in their home. And we've been able to do a capable program, which is an in-home type of service. It's actually a John Hopkins trademark name that we were able to implement in the last couple of years. And we were able to expand our home health agency. I don't know, how many staff? Triple the fold, Kirsten?
We have 10. We currently have 10 staff.
10 staff when we used to have one to two. So you can see that there's just an enormous explosion in that area. And that's really great because we saw the need and we heard from the community before COVID. And when COVID hit, it was a gap as COVID was so great at showing us what the gaps are, but is one of the areas where we're able to really build out, and feel very fortunate for this community that and for PMC to be able to build that out. Our therapies took a hit. We had some turnover in there, but the need is tremendous. There's a tremendous waiting list for our rehab department. We're also starting to see some recovery and starting to see some people come back in, and I feel like there's some growth there as well, but it's just a show. And this is, without going into all the detail here, this is our sort of primary care clinic outpatient services. And that explosion there is just the volume of what we've been able to do with COVID. So on the one side, our services, our normal routine services went down, but all the activity that we had to do related to COVID, the testing, the screenings, the response just went through the roof. You know, our lab, our clinic has been able to had to triage all the patients and do all the testing, and it's answer all the phones, and it's just you know, I hear it all the time as far as how difficult that's been. That's all I got. Look at that. I did an hour.
Questions?
Like that.
Yeah, questions for,
I got a comment. Personally, I want to thank everybody on the hospital board and Phil for the excellent job you've done on building a new hospital. I'll have to admit, at first when I was hearing about this, I was pretty skeptical, but you really answered all my questions, and I feel that you're definitely moving in the right direction. And then on another level, I really want to thank everybody that's worked at the hospital for the last couple of years. It's been very divisive. COVID has created a lot of divisions in the community, but I feel very fortunate. I live here in this community because I think one of the reasons that we got through it on the other end without having a lot of people get seriously ill and passing away is because of the efforts that and the extreme amount of work that I know you guys did to keep us safe. So thanks.
Thank you. Anybody else, the hospital board or staff?
I just wanted to make one comment about the locations and the sites. The hospital did not pick these sites. The board did not pick these sites. These sites were given to us by the borough. And so that's what we're working with, the sites that were given to us by the borough. I believe the sizes and the shapes are not set in stone. I believe that's something that may change with time as we get them surveyed and checked out and stuff. So I wouldn't get too caught up in the size, the shapes and stuff on these particular sites until we see what we actually have and what our needs are. And so to address Jeff's concerns, my hope is that we won't be right on top of someone's residential area. There's nothing that we want to do that. So hopefully that'll put some people's minds at ease that the shapes and sizes and location may change and move around a little bit, the spots they're at.
Kind of laughing because if we're too far from any homes, it's, oh, you're putting it out in the middle of nowhere. And if it's too close, then it's too close. So I think finding that constructive criticism as we go forward is going to be a lot of the work.
We also heard about outside agencies, and several months ago, I was underwhelmed by the presentation that Search gave here. And are they part of this conversation, or are we headed to building our own facility? Or where are they in this process, if they are at all?
Yeah, I can answer that. I did follow up with leadership at Search following that the presentation. And, it's a starting point where where we could work collaboratively, and what are some opportunities to work collaboratively. I think one of the things that I would love to see is some of the services, add-on services that they provide to be able to to increase some of our service lines. For example, some of their services that are already in town, could we actually use this campus style and have an opportunity where there's a building on the same location? Makes a lot of sense. In the same way that we are talking about this continuity of care with assisted living and senior living, could we also invite Search to be able to put some locations up there for the mental health services, dental services? I certainly have had follow-up. I offered that as well. It'd be great to have an opportunity to be able to build that out. I didn't hear anything one way or the other as far as positive or negative. When I talked to leadership about that, it wasn't, we'll just have to see. But that door, I certainly opened that door. I certainly would love to see that. I think it's a great opportunity for collaboration and potentially could be something we can build off of. We are working on some additional services, such as scoping services, some other services to come into Petersburg, working through our credentialing process and working into our facility to be able to provide our services on site. We are definitely trying to move in that direction as well. Those are sort of stepping stones to work together. I think it's very important to work collaboratively with other entities and organizations.
The only point I wanted to make on that is that at this point in time, Search has not proposed building a hospital. That was a conversation that got started in the community, but even at the Search presentation, that was not an option that they discussed. What they did discuss was coming in and rescuing organizations that were faltering. We are not at that place. We are operating in the black, and we are a capable organization. So there are collaborative opportunities, but at this point in time, there is no Search hospital.
Yeah, certainly the CEO made that very clear in that presentation for sure. Yeah. And they're building a huge campus up in Sitka. They got a lot of things going on. So certainly, again, always looking for the collaborative opportunity, with the things that we want to make sure we're building up and we're not tearing down, that you're working together and not working apart. Those are really, really strong, important things. I think to mention, build up for the comments as far as working together. I think that it's not just a hospital. We were able to work closely together with the assembly, with the borough, with the school on a response with COVID. And so it's mutual, we're able to do, things because we work together. And I think that's really the common thread with some of these things. And if we can get a community hospital out of it and provide additional services and provide additional services up on the hill, specialty services or otherwise through other different entities, then that's great. So.
Other questions, Jeff? Did you have? You,
Well, with the commitment of the $8 million that we got from Senator Murkowski's office, which we're very thankful for, is that encouraging to you? Is that like, she understands that there's a need in this community for it? And
Yeah, I spent some time talking with her when she came in during Mayfest, and I have to say I was very impressed. She very community oriented. If I dare speak for her, she was very focused on developing community partnerships. She saw the some of the need up in staffing issue, concerns, and she was really advocating for partnerships in the community to make sure that we can work together. So yeah, I would say yes. Yeah.
thank you.
other questions? Hospital board staff? Boy, I kind of a silent group here. I got a couple of things I will follow up on. And Chelsea, I agree with you on, at some point, we got to look at where we're going to go with that building, but I think we need to set of plans in place first, and then we need to address that somewhere along those. I totally agree with you. And Monday night, when we passed the $7,000, Jeff, it was passed unanimously to look at, explore those sites. I was thinking of this at that point in time. I think there's opportunities here to collaborate so we don't do the same thing, going for the same. And I also know that staff was looking at seeing how you could use some of the things we're doing here to help facilitate, more subdivision and stuff. Makes sense. Just going to take a little bit of time thinking about it. I think I agree with you. Couple other things, Monday night, as we passed, that give the manager options to work with Phil to look at both sites and to allow the staff now to work in detail with Phil and whoever he's contracted with to look at where our infrastructure is and how we can add on. So it's going to take a while, but I think we made the right move Monday night. I think we're on the right path. And so I appreciate everything we did there. Last on that I have was on that community needs assessment. It was really interesting if you've taken a look at that, some of the things that we're doing right now on childcare and looking at housing and so forth, we're on that assessment. So it's come around that the assembly is addressing some of the issues that were on there. I think that's excellent. Where some of that will go, I don't know, but we're working on it anyhow. And with that, Phil, do you have anything you would add in conclusion or anybody else?
No, I'm thankful. I like to summarize the action items and keep it really on point. And I'm really grateful for the opportunity. And I'm so glad we're making some progress.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sure. Yep. Grab a microphone, please.
I'm just so happy to see the level of cooperation that we have between the assembly and the hospital board. And hopefully we'll get a vast majority of the community also walking in the same direction. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? If not, we'll call an end to the work session, and thank you, Phil, for all your work.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right, thank you.
Got my burn on the book, so I have to scramble the notes.